Today we stop at this slide, memory and storage term. I want to repeat here is because for this course or for people who are using the digital devices, when we talk about kilobytes, we want it to be exact. So we refer to the 2 to the power instead of 10 to the power, right? So for kilobyte, we look at 2 to the power of 10, and we want to know the exact number of bytes. That is 1024. Although in newspaper or wherever you find magazines, they might talk about 1000, but the correct figure should be 1024, right? For mega, it's going to be 2 to the power of 20, and this is the number, instead of just 10 to the power of 6, which is 1 million, right? And same thing for giga and tera. I think the other four, you can forget about it because I think it's not commonly used, right? So at least for the first 4 terms, you are supposed to know, right? All right, we are going to finish chapter 4, the system unit, by today, right? So next week we are going to continue chapter 7 on storage devices, right? So the last few topics here, the first one here is expansion slot and adapter card, which is very easy to be found inside the system unit. Maybe I think just show you some picture here, right? Basically, when you open up a system unit, you see something like this. This is the so-called motherboard, right? This is the top view. And you see those slots here. Can you see the white bar here is basically the expansion slot. These are the slots that you can plug in the expansion card or adapter card for additional functionality, right? As I mentioned, most of the time in the past when we buy a desktop computer, we might not know exactly what we intend to do, especially in a university lab. Sometimes you might want it to use for certain scientific application. You need to buy a specific card, so you can add on to it to make the computer become a very special purpose computer, right? So the expansion slot is the one that allows you to add in the so-called expansion card or so-called the adapter card to improve or to get extra functionality, right? So a closed loop will be something like that. You can see all the slots here, right? These are for you to plug in the adapter card. And how about the adapter card? I show here is just another, just a typical adapter card. We call it a graphic card, right? You can see that on this graphic card, there are some components on it. For example, you need to have graphic memory, right? Memory chips are there. Also, there will be a graphic processor. And usually the processors are also high power. Okay, you take away quite a lot of energy. That's why the heat are generated. So as per normal, you have to have a heat sink, right? And even have a fan to actually blow the heat away, right? So over one corner here, you can see there are the edge connector. The edge connector is for you to slot into the expansion bus, right? So that you have a physical contact with the motherboard. And over the other end are usually the connector. Connector for you to connect to external devices, right? So usually through certain cable. For this case, because it's a graphic card, you can see there's a DVI, digital video interface, or even just a simple VGA connector. Many of you have used a computer, you know all these are video connector, right? So in order to mount this card, you will open up the box, you will be able to slot in a card, something like this, right? So usually after slotting this card into the slot, you also have a small screw here to tighten so that you attach to the back panel. And all the access ports, the connectors are always facing the back panel, right, for you to access from the back panel. All these slides I'll pull up on the Adventure website. These are additional. Right. Just now we mentioned that we are going to talk about expansion slot and the adapter card, or so-called the expansion card. So hope you have a better idea with the pictures. What are the adapter card for? They are supposed to enhance the system functionality. Not only that, that will provide the connection to the external device. Say for example, you need to control an external hard disk. You need to have a cable to connect to that hard disk through this special port on the card, expansion card. also called the expansion card. So either you call it adapter or expansion. The table here give you a list of very commonly found cards here. Maybe we just look at a few here. This controller, right, typically allow you to connect to hard disk, external hard disk. Things like FireWire, also very common among the Macintoshes, right? You use it to connect to video equipment. Say, for example, a video recorder or a DVD player, right? You need to connect to a video player. And things like, for example, the MIDI. MIDI is a bit, unless you play electronic organs, right? You will be able to connect to play electronic organ music. Other things like, for example, network card, very common. In the desktop, you need to have a network card to connect to network, other computers. And of course, you have video card as well as sound card, right? Okay, we go a little bit more detail here. First, we look at expansion slot. Just now the diagram show you a close-up picture. What are these? They are an opening or a socket on the motherboard. Typically, you can find it on the motherboard. When you open up the system unit, you see all these row of connector, right? And these are the connector for you to slot in the adapter card or expansion card, okay, to add on extra functionality, right? And a good term here is we need to know is plug and play. I think nowadays it's very common. You just buy the hardware. These are considered additional. You plug it in. You hope that it will set up by itself, configure by itself. Not the case in the past. If you think about 10 or 20 years ago, when you buy a new card and you want to slot it into a computer, it might not work because you need to manually set up certain switches. I will just show you another two slides. What are those things that you need to do, right? Typically, on the new card, they will give you something like this dip switch, right? Or sometimes they use jumper, the jumper connector, right? So they will advise you to set certain figure, right? With a different jumper location, you come out with different setting. Two important setting in this card is, one is what? One is the address range, because most of the memory card contains certain memory. So memory, we are talking about certain range from this address to that address. With the jumper setting, you will be able to set it correct. The other one is called the interrupt number, like this one here, because there are quite a number of interrupts that is available. So you have to set it to the correct number. Assuming you set the card to the number similar to the existing card, we call these two cards crash with each other. Most likely, you will never be able to bring up the system. The worst case is you add in another card. You set the interrupt number or the memory size, the range, similar to your graphic card. Then that's it. You can't even see anything on your monitor because the graphic card is supposed to run the user interface for you and between you and the computer, right? So that makes the job of setting up, when you add in a card, you need certain technical expertise. For many people, they don't even know what is the switch setting for, what is the jumper connector supposed to connect to. Then you normally have to get some technical support, right? So this is not the thing that we want to see. So subsequently, in order to make the computer easy to use, user-friendly, plug and play. The system will configure the card itself. And hopefully, when you plug in, install the hardware, install the software, everything come out nicely. And that is the situation now, right? When you slot in anything into the USB port, it takes a while, detect your device, and it's ready to use. That is something, we call it plug and play, right? We will talk about some special expansion slots. Just now, those are typical standard expansion slots. So we will look at some special expansion slot and those cards that slot into this special expansion slot. These are basically for what? For removable flash memory, the thing that you use very often, memory card or memory sticks, right? So typical slot are the camera slot, USB ports, as well as express card slot. So with these three pictures here, it gives you some idea. For camera, every one of you own one or two, right? So normally you want to change the memory, there will be just a small window to open and then you slot in. Typically a toggle kind of installation, right? You just push it in, it lock. You push another time, you take it out. So these are the slot for you to put in the memory card. Different types, different size are possible, right? Another one is the one that we use every day, or the notebook USB port. So you can put in the thumb drive, anything that is with a USB connector, right? You slot it in and it will be able to detect myself, and for a while it will just allow you to continue to use, right? And this one is a bit special. We call it a PC, or so-called express card. Older version is called PC card. PC stands for PCMCIA. It's a very special standard. Typically, you have a credit card size card for you to add additional functionality. Typically used for communication, like network card or additional memory, right? Some older notebook will have this slot. I think the newer version, they forget about it because now everything can be done by USB. So they do not want to duplicate this slot. So this is something on the older computers, older notebooks. Right, next we talk about another two terms here, the ports and the connectors, right? Sometimes you mix up the two. What do we mean by, are they the same? Okay, they are not the same, right? A port is what? It's a point at which the external device, peripherals, will attach to the system unit. Not only that, through that particular port, the external device will be able to communicate with the system unit, right? This is the way the computer talks to the external device. And sometimes you call a port a jack, okay? So these two terms are used interchangeably, right? And when you talk about a connector, the connector joins the cable. So when you have a cable, the two ends, okay, of the cable, usually you see a connector. So the one on the computer side, back panel, usually we call it a port, okay, certain port, right, video port, audio port. But the one on the cable itself, we call it a connector, right? Be able to differentiate these two terms. Right, if we want to take a close look here, we show two diagrams here. Both are the back panel of the system unit, a desktop computer system unit, right? So if you have one at home, most likely you see something like this. There are tons of so-called ports showing at the back panel, right? Over here, I think the names are all there. I think we just maybe see a few here. One is the mouse port for you to connect to your mouse. Of course, the mouse also can go into the USB if you have a USB mouse, right? And then you have a keyboard as well. You can also use a USB if you have a USB keyboard, right? And I think for desktop, most likely you find this because they reserve the USB for other purpose, right? So they have enough space for putting additional ports, right? So all these become standard. Things like network, USB, everything is all there. I think I don't want to go through all of them. However, you turn to the right-hand side here, we are talking about the connector, right? So when you talk about connectors, you say that this will join the cable to a port, right? You have a cable. All these are the cables. That over the end of the cable, you should see a connector. The connector is the one that connects to the port, okay? They must match, okay? And they are so-called male and female, right? So if the port is a female port, you need to have a connector of the male type. Chances is sometimes you just too bad, you get the same sex. Then you have to go and look for another one, right? Okay, to look at all the different types of connector and how do you use it for, right? We have different types. All these are available here, right? The connector, as I mentioned, located at the end of the cable. So when you buy a cable, you know that both ends you have certain connectors. And be able to get the correct one before, if you say, I want to connect to video, VGA port, so you need to find a VGA connector. And you have to know whether the VGA port, is it a male or female. Then you get the connector with the correct opposite sex, okay? So I think I'll just go through some of them. The first one here is what? DB9, 9-pin connector, right? So this is typically a serial port. At the back panel of the desktop unit, usually you have a COM port. COM stands for communication port. It's a serial port. And the smaller connector is a 9-pin type. Okay, you can also have a serial port that is DB25, means they have 25 pins, which is a bigger one, and it's also a COM port. Okay, both are serial communication, right? When you ask why so many pin can do, so small number of pin also can do, this one I think a little bit overdoing, right? 25 pins, many of the pins are not used. Because remember, serial communication, they only need to have what? The 2 passage only, to and fro, right? So not so many pins. So most of the pins are not used. So sooner or later they find that this overkill, so they reduce to 9 pins. In fact, even the 9 pins, most of the pins, some of the pins are not used, right? And then we also talk about this VGA port. I think the one we are using for connecting to the video projector, right? I have one, the thick cable here is the video VGA port. And also we have things like this, this is what the, okay, DVI. If you have a high definition, you have a TV support this standard, you will be able to get a high HD TV output, right? DVI, Digital Video Interface. The other equivalent, of course, is HDMI, okay? If you have HDMI output. And the other one that is common in the past is the Centronic. You heard about the name Centronic, okay? That one will support a printer, a parallel printer. But nowadays you also talk about USB printer. So everything go back to USB. And there's another big connector, super big one. So this is called the SCSI connector. SCSI in the past is mainly for hard disk or the scanner. If you buy a high-end scanner or hard disk, typically they will give you this SCSI connector, a very big cable. Right, the others is the typical USB and also FireWire, the so-called IEEE 488, right? I think that's about, the rest are the network, RJ45 is the network ports. And also things like, this one is for what? For your video, is it? No, this is for your mouse, right? The mouse, 5-pin mouse. Okay, how about the a close-up view of the ports? Just now was all the connectors, right? So when we talk about ports, remember that they are at the back panel of the desktop PC, right? A whole column, whole rows of that, right? And remember, ports are also called the jacks, okay? All these are the possible ports available at the back panel, right? If you look at here, we have audio in for your mic, and we have things like, for example, we have DVI for video, and we also have FireWire. We have things like network, RJ45, right? I think go through yourself. All these are possible ports that you can find for a desktop computer. The ports on the notebook are more restrictive, typically because nowadays the notebook are thinner and thinner, right? Total thickness is less than 1 cm. So you can't put too many ports on the notebook itself. Typically, you have certain ports at the back edge and then the side edge, right? Typically, in front there will be no ports, only the side or the back, right? So as you can see that typically you see a network ports, you see things like modem. Also nowadays, I think some notebook might not have modem. Modem is mainly for phone wire, right? And we also have things like USB, quite a number. Sometimes they give you USB 2 and also some USB 3, right? The newer version usually have USB 3. And just now we mentioned about express card. Nowadays also most of them remove it because very few people are using it, right? Anything else? Don't have, right? Almost there. Okay, just now we mentioned about different ports, right? We'll go into a little bit detail what are these ports. First is the serial ports. And we mentioned the COM port, right? Communication ports. When you say COM1, COM2, in the older computers back panel, you see a COM1 or COM2, that refer to these serial ports. And the way that the data going through the serial port is sequential, bit by bit. So at each time, over the clock, okay, normally they have a synchronization clock, right? For every clock cycle, they will be able to send out only 1 bit. So the picture here shows everything. Assuming you need to set, from this computer, you need to send out these 3 bytes of information, 1, 3, and 5, right? So they will be able to send out, you know, the number 1, 3, and 5 is in this sequence, right? Remember the ASCII character for 1, 3, and 5, right? So they will be sending the bytes, not the whole bytes out, okay? However, the byte is lined up in bit by bit and sent out according to this pattern. Every single clock, there's only a single bit, right? So you can expect the speed to be very, very slow. And that's the reason that all these COM port are to support slow device. Slow device like mouse, older version of mouse, or the keyboards, okay? These are things that work with human being, right? Human being cannot do too fast, right? Typing is too slow compared to computer, right? So using the RS-232, so-called the COM port. The standard use is so-called RS-232, right? And this is the kind of ports that you use for slow device. And over here you can see that there's a 9-pin port, right? And this is the male type. So in order to connect to the external device, you need to find another connector, also a 9-pin, however it's of the female type, so that you'll be able to connect to the external device. I mentioned just now that there are also 25 pins connector, right? So in that case, you need to find a 25 pins ports. The opposite of the serial communication is parallel. So we have a parallel ports also in most of the desktop computer. In the PC, in the notebook, I don't think it exists anymore. There's no more parallel ports. Okay, what is a parallel port? It connect the external device and send data not bit by bit. This time it will be bytes by byte, at least, right? 8 bits. It said more than 1 bit, but normally people don't send 2 bits and consider parallel, right? They will send out a whole byte, okay? So 8 bits at one time for this case. So just now the same thing, the 3 numbers, 1, 3, and 5. We know that 1 is of this pattern, 3 is of the other patterns. So the data will be going out 8 bits at one go. That means for every single clock, 1 byte of data, 8 bits will go out in one go to the external device. So at least if you compare this with the serial communication, at least 8 times faster, right? So you can have 8 bits at one go, right? And one commonly used device is the printer. You connect a printer through a parallel port in the past. As I mentioned, printer also go for USB. So I don't think you can find any new device using parallel port nowadays also. Most likely, if you are an engineering student, you may still find certain connection using parallel port. But sometimes you can't find a computer to support, right? We go to something newer. So far, all the things are very old, so remote to you, right? So at least this one is something that you are familiar with, USB port. Okay, it said USB port can connect up to 127 different devices with a single port. Okay, that port itself will be able to support up to 127 devices using a single cable. But most of the time, you connect that port with a hub. Okay, you know that a USB hub, typically you get one with 6 ports or 4 ports, right? And because when you need to support, USB port can only support certain low current devices. In order for you to support many devices, that port will not have enough current to drive. So for the hub, the USB hub, usually you come with a so-called AC adapter, something to give you extra boost, the current enough to drive the external devices, right? So when we talk about buying a hub, you can say with or without 5-volt power supply. If you want to drive something like hard disk, scanner, all this, you better to have a higher current supply, okay? And let's talk about some USB standard. Originally, when it first came out, it was 1.1, and it's hopeless, 12 megabit per second. Look at the B here is small letter. Whenever you see a small letter B, it refers to bit, okay, megabit per second. Previously, you saw the capital B, that B stands for, most of the times, refer to byte, okay? So when you want to talk about small b, it is bit per second. So you can see that it's very, very slow, right? In the past, I remember when we first get a digital camera, when you want to transfer the image picture taken to computer, it will take ages. Photo by photo, it takes long time to get it over. So I think user experience is not good. So they come out with a USB 2 from 1996. 4 years later, 2000, come out with the 2.0. 2.0 was good. 480 megabit. You can see how many times, at least 40 times, right? And in fact, because the USB 1.1 was slow, actually the other standard come into picture, that is FireWire. Remember the Macintoshes boast the speed using a FireWire. And many a time, because Mac was used for desktop publishing, for video editing, so they need to have a fast connection to connect to video equipment. And the FireWire can go up to 400 megabit per second, okay? And compared to original USB 1.1, the FireWire is a lot faster. But the USB standard is going to just sit there and wait, right? So it come out with 2, which is 480, okay? So in fact, it's comparable to the FireWire. So the moment USB 2 come out, there's no concern. I think even Mac or PC both will use USB 2. And sooner or later, you find most of the video equipment also make use of USB 2 instead of using the FireWire. Of course, the FireWire still, there are people still using it. And both actually continue to improve. I'll touch on the FireWire later. It also increased in terms of the performance, right? Okay, another small diagram here is the types of connector, okay? You look at here, we have type A, type B, and type C. The diagram may not be so clear, but you know what are they, right? For normal PC or for normal connection, you have a type A, the one with a rectangular shape, right? If you want to connect to printer, usually you get a big rectangular shape, right? A little bit solid one, right? That is the type B. And for some other device, you have a type mini B, right? Mini B is slightly bigger than the micro USB. Sometimes you thought they are the same, but you cannot plug in, right? So this is, let's say you have a power, what do you call it, power bank, right? Power bank, normally you have 2 connectors, right? The other connector usually is so-called, for charging it. For charging it, sometimes they use a mini B. The newer one might use the so-called micro USB, but you can happen to find a mini B, right? A slightly bigger than the micro USB. Of course, the last one, micro USB here, is for your mobile phone. Now, beside, I think Apple still not using it, but all the others, mobile phones, I think are all using the so-called micro USB, right? Okay, USB 2, you might think that is quite fast. However, after a while, you think that it's still too slow, right? Because when you are moving gigabyte of content, like video, you still think it's too slow, right? So the new standard USB 3 now available, right? Since when? Since which year? Year 2010, 4 years ago or 3 years ago, right? So this is called the super speed USB, and the speed is much faster, 10 times faster. So you go up to 5 gigabit per second. That is hell lot faster, right? So you can expect to get more and more device supporting USB 3. You go out to get a hard disk, you also look for USB 3. Right nowadays, you do not want to have anything substandard. And just for comparison, just how I said, the 2 standards are always trying to compete with each other. The other one is FireWire or so-called IEEE 488 or something. So for FireWire, originally it was 400. So-called FireWire 400. 400 means 400 megabit per second. Okay. So later they come out with 800, 1006, and 3200. So the 3200, in fact, is a 3.2 gig already. 3.2 gig compared with 5, they are quite comparable. So you can say the latest FireWire is quite good compared to the so-called USB 3. Right? Both of them are quite equivalent. Okay, we talk about some other types of ports, special purpose port. Okay, these are all the special purpose ports. And what are these used for? It says allow user to attach. When we say special, means these are special peripherals, special external devices. For example, that the digital video camera. All these require high transfer speed. Okay, they want to. For each video, it may be a few gigabytes, right? So you need to have high-speed transmission to make it productive, right? So also color printer need a lot of, you want to send out pages of color for printing, you need to have high speed transmission, right? Scanner as well, this drive, right? And these are the few, all the types here, right? And sometimes also you need to have wireless transmission. Those are also considered special ports. The two examples is IRDA and the Bluetooth. Right, I will go a little bit more detail about each of these. First one is a FireWire that the Apple Macintosh use it first. They call, in fact, I think the term is coined by Macintosh, FireWire. The other camp, all the PC or other computer, they name it as IEEE 488. Because if they call them FireWire, I think it will be sued for patent, right? So they call it IEEE 488, right? Is that FireWire port is similar to USB? So when we say USB, we know it's a serial communication, serial interface, right? So FireWire is also serial, right? And it can connect up to I think 63 devices. Same thing, one port itself, one FireWire port will be able to daisy chain that number of devices. Talk to up to 63. USB how many? USB can go up to 127. Okay, this one is half that number, 63, right? And the other I mentioned just now, they have come out with different speed. The maximum that it can go 3200 means megabit per second. So you can roughly say that it's 3 GBS, okay? GBPS, gigabit per second, right? Originally, the first version was 400. 400 means 400 megabit per second, right? The next one is called the MIDI, right? MIDI stands for Musical Instrument Digital Interface. So the word here mentioned about musical means got something to do with music. So typically this port itself also a serial interface. That will allow you to connect to what? Allow you to connect to system unit. However, the other end you can connect to a electronic keyboard, so that you can actually compose music, okay, using this particular port. And this becomes the so-called music industrial standard. MIDI, you normally say this is a MIDI interface. The organs support MIDI interface, so you can connect to the PC, right? So there will be certain application software that drive the organ, okay? So this is the way we use it. The other one I want to say is eSATA, right? SATA stands for what? Serial Advanced Technology Attachment. Okay, remember SATA stands for this one. The original SATA was an internal drive. Okay, you have typical hard disk called SATA hard disk. SATA hard disks are the one that is installed as an internal drive. That means for a desktop, you have enough slot for you to put in the SATA drive, internal drive. However, for some other machine, you might want to add additional drive. You can always have an eSATA. E stands for external, right? External SATA port will allow you to connect to an external SATA drive, right? And good thing about this is the performance is much better. It said compared to the USB attached hard disk, this eSATA can go up to 6 times the performance of the external USB. The one you use it very often, you have a USB hard drive, right? You are quite happy with it, but for video, I think might be too slow, right? So it will be good you can have an eSATA, right? Okay, the other reason why we have special ports is just now we mentioned for wireless communication. So we have two cases here. One is the Bluetooth wireless. For most of the notebook, I think most of the notebook nowadays built in with so-called Bluetooth communication. You can easily transfer your handphone file to the notebook, right? A photo or anything you capture, you can transfer. Just to pair it and then you can transfer. But for desktop computer, most of the time it doesn't build in with one, okay? So a good thing is to just to buy the so-called the dongle here, a Bluetooth dongle. You plug into the other end, you plug into the USB port. So by plugging this into the USB port, this will be converted to a Bluetooth port, okay? So any Bluetooth device should be able to communicate with your PC now, right? This is to enhance the functionality for your desktop PC, right? You want to transfer any file from your mobile devices through this wireless means, right? You don't want to connect a cable. Typically, for a big number of files to transfer, I would normally use a USB, either a cable, right, a syncing cable. But for 1, 2 files, just too troublesome. Pair it and transfer over, right? And for older version of devices, even the old handphone, one standard we mentioned in the past is IRDA. Be able to say what is IR, infrared, okay, infrared communication. I couldn't remember the data association, I think. D stands for data, A stands for association. This is a kind of society or a kind of standard, IRDA. For you to have phone, if both have this standard, you will be able to send data over the IRDA. However, this is notoriously very unreliable. First thing, the infrared is line of sight. You need to point the port toward the receiver, right? If you just point it somewhere misaligned, you will not be able to send the data over, right? So this is not some. If you have a remote control at home, you know that you make sure you point to the correct location. Sometimes you have so many, you have a TV, you have a DVD or whatever, you point to the wrong location, you will never get the infrared to work, right? So this is something bad, so not so much in use. You can't find a phone with the IRDA nowadays. If you have one, okay, certain modern smartphone will have IRDA, but that is for what? For using it as a remote control, right? Sometimes they say my handphone can turn on a TV for that purpose. Another important topic is buses, right? This one is not the bus you take to NTU, okay? The buses is a channel that allows devices inside the computer to communicate with each other, right? So typically we will have things like data bus, address bus, and for a bus we talk about the width. How wide is the bus? That means how many parallel wires are there, right? A bus usually uses a ribbon cable. It's a big thick cable, and within that cable there will be many parallel cable, right? So that is called the data bus width, okay? And typically when we say a bus width, we talk about 32-bit or 64-bit nowadays, right? I just want to show you a typical bus system in a PC, right? For a PC, this bus will allow processor to communicate with the peripherals. And this is a CPU, the processor. And at the middle here, we will have one called the bus controller, right? It's a chipset. For every motherboard, they will always say this is certain chipset. That chipset will be able to control the overall communication between the CPU and other devices. The faster that it can communicate is called a system bus. The processor communicates with the memory using the so-called system bus. And there are other buses to connect to like AGP graphic card, okay? And also like PCI for all the other high-speed devices, connectors, right? So this is just to show you one. And also sometimes they use another adapter to convert the PCI into ISA. ISA was the standard about 20 years ago. Most of the original PC will have ISA bus. So sometimes you still have some older cards that you need the ISA bus, you use it. Connect to this one. Right, when we talk about bus, the system bus, as we can see that this is the one that connects to the memory, right, the RAM. Bus width itself will determine the number of bits transmit at one time. That means, just now remember, it's a ribbon cable, right? How many parallel lines are there? That will dictate at any one time how many bits will be carried over that bus, right? And he said the wider the bus, the faster the communication, because at each instant you can transmit more bytes across. If you have a 32-bit bus, you can transmit 32 divided by 4, so it's 4 bytes straight away across, right, one time. If you have a 64-bit bus, 64 divided by 8, you get 8 bytes. That means 8 bytes of information sent across at one time. So the other terms is the word size. The word size refers to what? The number of bits processor can process at one time. Processor normally take in the data at one chunk, right? How big is that chunk of data to be processed by processor is called the word size. And typically, it also equal to the register. Remember, we talked about register in the earlier lecture. The register is a fast storage within the processor, and sometimes we call it a 32-bit machine or a 64-bit machine or 16-bit machine. When you talk about 16-bit, 32-bit, that refers to the what? To the word size of that computer. Also referring to the register size. Register is a 32-bit register. Then we call it a 32-bit machine. Okay, not the address bus. How many address doesn't matter. It's the data bus or so-called the data size that is important. It said in most computers, the bus width equal to the word size, and they decide the data transfer speed. Okay, the wider you have, the more bits you have for the registers, the faster your machine is, right? So that's why the PC has moved from 8 bits to 16 bits to 32 bits. Most of the time we are still using 32 bits. For some of you who can spend more, you get the 64 bits. The new OS, Windows 8 is using 64 bits, right? And the new iPhone also using 64 bits. Right, so we have some other additional bus. The expansion slot connect to these buses. Right, just now we talked about this, the importance of having the bus. At the end of the bus, it has to connect to some expansion slot so that the card can slot into this bus and communicate with the CPU. Right. What are the different buses we have? We have PCI, one of the older standard. We also have the newer standard called PCIe with a small e at the back, PCI Express. It is about 2 times PCI. And we also have AGP, the one come out with Intel for 3D graphic communication. This is a lot faster than the older PCI. In the past, the graphic card are plugged into the PCI bus, which is not fast enough. For game playing like high-speed games, you need to have a AGP bus, the card slot into this port, okay? And of course, you have USB and FireWire, just now we mentioned. Right. This one we have covered, so I don't think I want to go into detail. We talk about FireWires, right? So I think we'll just move on. We talk a little bit about PCIe. PCI Express bus, it is a high-speed serial expansion interface, right? And then he said that original intention, just as I mentioned, the older standard was PCI, and then it also come out, because PCI is too slow, so they come out with what? They come out with AGP, right? Intel come out with AGP, and both are still not fast enough, because when you come to the high-end video game program, it's still too slow, right? So they want to come out with the PCIe standard to replace these two. So now everything will replace by PCIe that can send data along a series. You can see that most of the time when things want to move faster, they always go to serial interface, okay? And these serial interface are called lanes, okay? Something like root, right? So you can have that many, 1, 2, 4, 8, 16 or 32 lanes. If you want to have more transfer speed, you just employ more lanes, right? So that's to get more data to transfer in one go, right? Just to compare with the PCIe, the old PCI standard. The old PCI standard originally was a 32-bit bus, right? So the system clock is 33 megahertz, and that is how much? With 33 megahertz, for every hertz, that will be able to handle only 4 bytes. And for the 64-bit machine, it only clock at 66 megahertz. So as you can see, the performance won't be that good, right? Okay, another term here is called the base. Okay, you know that for system unit, sometimes when you first purchase a machine, you only have the budget for 1 hard disk. Sooner or later, you find that my hard disk is full. I want to get another hard disk. First thing you have to check is whether you have empty slot or not. We talk about whether you have empty slot. So you look at the chassis. Usually there are some opening in front, right? For the spare slot, they normally use a dummy cover to cover it. So luckily, you pull out one of the dummy cover, you find that there's an empty slot. So you can buy additional hard disk to put it in. Or maybe you want to have another optical drive, like DVD-ROM, you can afford to put another one inside there, right? So this is basically just a additional space for you to put in additional peripherals. Another term here is the power supply. I think everybody know about that. For PC, especially the power supply is important and it varies in size. For normal usage, 300 watts is good enough. But I know for high-end game machine, it can go all the way to 1,000 hertz, 1,000 watts. So the amount of memory that it uses is a lot. The amount of heat generated is also a lot. Okay. So look at because for game machine, the graphic card itself or the video card itself consume tons of energy. So you need to have a big power supply. For other things like notebook, typically you have an AC adapter. And also vary in size. AC adapter, you can have 60 watts, you can have 90 watts. I think it's a norm. And also for a bigger unit, you have 120 watts. And all these adapters are expensive. Remember, it costs you $100 to get one. So some other peripherals also have external power supply, the AC adapter. Okay, that's it for all these topics are covered under the system units. So next week, I'll use 2 hours to cover the last chapter on storage devices. See you in next week.